Fear Not, Episode 25. Hi, I'm Billy Atwell, and I believe that consistently facing your fears is the only way to realize your truest self and to make those confident choices that will help you to obtain your deepest held hopes and dreams. I have faith that this podcast series will show you that you are not alone, that it will strengthen you and give you courage to face your fears, and that it will help you to permanently cross over into a life of living beyond your fears. Join me on this journey as we listen and learn from others as they share their experiences in facing and overcoming their own fears. Hello, everybody. Today, you and I are going to be joined by Adriana Davis. Welcome, Adriana. How are you today?
Doing well, Billy. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well myself, thank you. Are you ready to fear not today?
I am ready to fear not. I feel emboldened, so I'm ready to go into the abyss and see where we land.
Adriana Davis has worked in film, television, and radio as a producer, writer, editor, and as a voiceover artist since 1991. She has worked as a field producer and an assignment desk editor for the electronic news gathering house Network Video Services for the production companies of Broadcast News Networks and Cameron Planet, as well as the cable and broadcast networks of A&E, History Channel, CNN, PBS, CBS, NBC, Court TV, ESPN, and BET. In 1995, she founded D Square Media, a full-service production company offering corporate clients producing, editing, scripting, voiceover, and online media services. Adriana has also produced, written, and edited several independent documentaries, feature films, and radio programming, such as the 2005 release The Last Jews of Baghdad, the final film in a trilogy 10 years in the making. The trilogy was screened at over 80 premiere film festivals in the US, Canada, Israel, and Europe, and has been featured on PBS and JLTV. Adriana, can you take a few seconds to fill in the gaps and maybe also give us a brief glimpse of your personal life?
Absolutely, my pleasure, and thank you for such a wonderful introduction. I hardly recognize myself as you were explaining all the work. Um, the only the gaps I would say would be that documentaries were always pretty much my stock and trade. I have 2 degrees in politics, and where that led me was never into elective politics, but more into history and the general idea of communities within government and how they function, and certainly world history as well. What started me on that path was actually being an intern in the British government when I was through a college program where I was the only freshman accepted into a program. It was supposed to be a graduate program, but we went over and spent several months with different members attached to a member of parliament. And I worked on a lot of different legislation and different types of programs. It was just around the time when Mrs. Thatcher took over. So it was, and I was working for a Labor MP. So that had its own. I learned a lot about politics from the inside out, and of course the international side of it. And the Iraqi films came about through my work at Court TV, which is no longer called Court TV. It's called True TV now. But I met somebody who was from the Iraqi Jewish community and happened to be an attorney being interviewed on court. And so we started talking, and it was supposed to be a short little 15-minute film about her grandfather who started Jewish schools in Iraq. He was a philanthropist that lived in Iraq and escaped just before the onset of World War II back here to the United States. And it turned into 10 years later 3 films about Iraq's the entirety of the Iraq Jewish community and how it dispersed into other countries. So the what happened after the documentaries is that those documentaries led me to get noticed by other types of writers, script writers, producers, etc. And I ended up producing a feature film, a real romantic comedy, a real chick flick, which is called Play It By Ear, and it starred Rita Moreno of West Side Story fame and a lot of other new and up and coming talent. And so to get into the differences between producing factual material and then producing narrative was a whole different thing, working off a script as opposed to a documentary, which you actually create after you've shot. A lot of times you create it in the edit room. That old adage is true. We'll fix it in post. So along the way, those films have been the reasons why I got into the into production as a whole. The corporate work you mentioned is what keeps it going. That's what pays the bills most of the time. That's kind of, I don't know if those are all the gaps, but I did want to mention just the trajectory of how working in the two biggest prongs were my studies in school, of course, where I took every arts class I could to supplement the political work and historical studies I did. And then coming out, and I think the second thing was right out of school, I was recruited to work on the Statue of Liberty restoration here in New York in 1980. 84 through 86, 87 for me, through the big year 1986 for the anniversary of the statue. Those two pieces really set me on because I worked in public relations and I worked directly with the community for the statue and the fundraising efforts and all the festivities that took place way back when. It really put me on a path to combine everything when I found television, and that was through my local public access channel in Long Island, in Great Neck, Long Island, public access TV, where I had it. Yeah, I had a show. I was, sort of the original Wayne's World there, but we did we did mostly community affairs type of programming, blood drives, anything that the community needed. But it really brought together the PR, the history, and politics that I learned in school, and then the public relations I did at the statue, and then certainly the work in Parliament when I was an exchange student there. So and that set me. It also added the third or fourth thing I guess I love, which is technology. And I became an editor very quickly. Producing was not enough. I needed to get my hands in there and actually edit material for my own programs. So and that added to the writing that I'd always done. So unlike what my father and mother wanted me to be this lawyer after those 2 degrees in politics, I didn't and did follow my dreams of getting into the arts in my own way.
Wow, well, I mean, that's just a really fascinating story. You've done a lot. So,
I don't know. I always feel there should be more. Getting back to the premise of your shows, the fear not. I think I feared not back then, especially now that I'm slightly over 25. I worry about not taking those kind of bold steps anymore and wanting to not rest on my laurels, so to speak, but keep adding new challenges.
well, on that topic, would you mind sharing with us one of your biggest fears that you've had to face?
Sure. There's a couple, but I think one of the biggest is not feeling that I measure up, and I think I think about my parents, my family that way. I'm married. I worry that I don't live up to the expectations of my soulmate. And even my niece and nephew, who I'm extremely close with. My brother, well, we have our sibling rivalry. That's fine. I don't worry too much. But I do. There's a more concrete example and something that I'm actually neglected to mention in my trajectory, and that was the in addition of voice work. Being a voice artist myself, and now of the last, really, it's the last 15 years overall that I've been teaching voice acting. It really made a huge difference standing up in front of. I've done a fair amount of public speaking in front of groups on acting, on movie making. I've been asked to talk about independent filmmaking to different groups I belong to, and those outside groups as well, alumni associations, things like that. But then this consistent work I've done teaching voice acting through the Great Voice Company and through my own company, through D Squared Media, has really, that's helped me reconnect to that fear not. Because when I stand up in front of that group, I have, and people who've been through any programs with me know, I just have such a passion for the use of the voice. Radio was, oh, you mentioned radio. Radio was always my first love. The show I had on WNEW FM here in New York was called Courageous Radio, something along the lines there of Fear Not a little bit. And we had a weekly show on there, an hour-long show where we handled different topics. It was some of the favorite. I love my films, and the films are important and they're impactful. They helped a community document itself and it wasn't documenting itself. I'll explain more about that in the another Iraq part of when I worked on the Iraq films and how fear entered into that. But somehow voice is so personal. It's such an amazing thing to watch students of mine and even myself transform somebody else's words and turn them into something that motivates a consumer, or in the documentaries, documents of people, motivates someone into action. So some of the PSAs I've done and work for nonprofits that change lives. You might have heard me say that before in front of the group. I do believe that anything I've done, and thank you for the compliment on seems like a lot, but anything I've done, I've always was taught or somewhere I picked up, it really doesn't mean anything unless I change lives along the way. That has to mean something. And so when I presented our film, The Last Jews of Baghdad, the third in the trilogy, at the Toronto Jewish Film Festival, which is the premier Jewish film festival in the world, and somebody in the audience stood up at the Q&A session after and said he wanted to thank me and my co-producer and our team for documenting his story, and how even his children had never asked him about his life in Iraq and what it was like, and how, why he left and how he left and all that. And that to me was worth any money that I ever made or didn't make, on the films, because it told me that I met my goal. And somehow that makes all the fear of it, and 10 years of working on a series of films, giving your life over to it, really, is, it was scary. What am I not choosing? Because I'm choosing this, to work on these films. And somehow that one man, almost, I don't really remember his name, one man actually made it worth my while. So I would say that the fears I've faced, or try to face every day, are the ones of feeling that I'm on the right path. That am I meeting my mission? Am I reaching my goal of not only doing interesting work that satisfies me, even if it's a medical video about catheters or something, and I do those, whatever it might be, whatever it is, that have I met the larger goal of in learning every day, learning myself, but then learning for myself, but then also changing lives. And if I'm changing life, then I'm not afraid.
So, what do you do to help you in that process? Because, like you were saying, the man stood up at the end of the film festival. That's kind of like the bonus, right? But during those moments when you're going to the journey, before those things happen, what keeps you motivated and staying out of that fear? How do you stay on track?
I'm afraid I won't finish. So I have to finish. It was something in my life. I call it my clarinet story. Okay, I'll give you my clarinet story. I play three musical instruments. I play piano, guitar, and violin, and I sang in jazz trios and choirs. And my friend and I had our own duet, little duo trio that we with different instruments and our music teachers. But I've been studying music. Music is beyond radio. Music is always my first love, and so I always played an instrument. It was part of, and I'm sad to say that a lot of music programs are no longer in school systems. But in my time, it was required that you take an instrument, and so I picked the clarinet. I've been going to symphony orchestras, ballets. My mother signed me up before I was born to go to what were later called the Leonard Bernstein's Young People's Concert. So I had seen orchestras, from when I was a small, this is what I loved, and all kinds of music, actually. But I picked the clarinet. Well, I started on the clarinet and continuing to go to symphonies and other things. This would have been around fifth grade, I guess, maybe fourth grade. Yeah, fourth grade. And I'd already started with my piano lessons on the side. That wasn't through school, and guitar also. So I was always, playing music. But I remembered going to the symphony and seeing and saying, well, no, I want to be the violins. They're up in front. The violins. No, I'm switching to violin. And my mother was furious with me for quitting. She didn't want me to quit. I guess she wanted me to play the clarinet and the violin maybe at the same time. I'm not sure. But I call it my clarinet story because we had a huge argument, fourth grade, about that I shouldn't quit things. You're not allowed to quit things. And that, eventually I did. I made her realize I wasn't quitting music, obviously. I was switching what instrument I would take. But she saw it somehow as quitting. And somewhere within my psyche, I think it created that feeling that I must finish what I start. Even if it doesn't turn out the way I thought it would, it actually has to be something. I have to, cross that T and dot that I, or I feel that I frankly have failed. And that is a fear. I definitely have a fear of failing. But it stems, I think, from the clarinet story of not finishing something, of quitting. You keep trying, and sometimes that's done me in, to be honest, Billy. Where there are certain things. I'm a big fan of the adage of, change the things I can, accept what accept what I can't, wisdom to know the difference. But I sometimes don't know when something is unworkable, and do start to, beat the old head against the wall, because I can't quit the clarinet. I don't know if that makes sense, but
So you've had quite an amazing journey. I'm sure you've come across a lot of great resources, and I was wondering maybe if you could share a couple with us.
well, let me get you asked me to get personal a little bit, and let me beyond the clarinet. And I think resources for everyone else that might want to get into any of these areas. I would say it's, don't discount any bit of media that's out there, and there's a lot out there. Exposure to it all has kept me, um, as I say, I'm over 50, and I have never shied away from technology. And I know so many friends of mine that do, and I think that's limiting. I have to live in today's world. Doesn't mean I don't still have my LPs and my books, my print books, and I read the newspaper and do the crossword puzzle every day in pen. So I think having a foot in both um, time frames and time zones, if you will, of our lives, different eras, keeps you alive, keeps you moving, keeps you not to give in to the fear, I think, as well.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. Are you ready for the speed round?
Yeah, I guess I am.
What individual that's fiction or real has made the most impact on your life?
I'd say I think I'd have to go with I think my father. He was there for me, so my dad.
If you could instantly change one thing in the world, what would that be?
I'd throw away every gun, bomb, everything that enables us to not talk through issues, and instead go to our basis instincts um, of war. Anything that would help us. I'm not utopian in that I think there is no such thing as conflict. Human beings are naturally they're conflict generators, but it's the way we handle those conflicts that personally, everything from road rage, right through to war on a global scale. I think it's the most biggest. Whenever as I say, I love history, and I'm addicted to any shows about history, National Geographic, anything. I watch them all, and I mean, I worked at A&E and History Channel. I had to, but I watch them all. But every time I see something about war in particular, it just tells me what a waste of time and a waste of resource. Where would we be as a species now if we just not destroyed all those magnificent brains and minds, and wasting years and time destroying when we could have been creating?
What's your biggest weakness?
It's my biggest strength and my biggest weakness, television. Because I was of a time when I had my own television in my room. We watched a lot of television in my house, but I do know how many hours I can spend, and just watching. Now I believe, though, that television taught me things.
If you could only have one book to read, what would that be?
Well, it's one I've read over and over again. It's The Razor's Edge by Somerset Maugham. It's a book that talks about discovery of yourself, and coming out of the thing I told you I hate the most, war, actually.
Do you have a favorite sound?
I have a recording of the phone calls that would come in from my niece and nephew as they were growing up. I can just listen to those tapes of those phone calls over and over again.
If somebody wants to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I would say go to my website, and of course I'm on all the social media stuff. But the website is dsquaredmedia.com. Sometimes people forget the trailing D. It's DSQUARED media, all one word, .com.
And what parting advice would you like to leave us with today?
Nobody, when my father passed away, he had a good full life. He wasn't as old as I would have liked him to be, and he spent 11 years battling. I'm sorry, I hate that term, battling cancer. I know that's what everybody says. I don't think of it as a fight. It bothers me. But I like to say he journeyed with his cancer for about 11 years, and he never once, such grace, never complained, none of it. And I know why. It's because not only was he not fearful, but but he wasn't afraid to touch love. He wasn't afraid to go to the places he needed to for his family. Everything was about that to him. And I think when you live that way, when you live with that kind of fearlessness, you end up with a grace that says, I've been there, and so I can relate to what you're afraid of because I too have been that way, and yet this is how I overcame. But I know that's where the peace and the grace came from at the end of his life, not laying there saying, oh, for one more day that I didn't do this, or I did. He had that fulfillment from from challenging himself to overcome his fears, to overcome the things that were difficult. And I think we forget about the pleasure we get from overcoming something difficult. We just look at the difficult part. But if we think and focus on the outcome of where I'm going to be when I get past this, or rather through it, because I think you have to go through fear to get past it. Think about the good parts that they're going to be for you, and the pride you will have in yourself, knowing that you didn't succumb to it, that you passed right through it and came out a better person and a more experienced person on the other end.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, and I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today, Adriana. It's been a really great pleasure, and I've learned so much more about you today. This has been awesome.
Pleasure for me as well, and I thank you so much for inviting me. And I will be definitely checking in on all the episodes out there. It's important work, I think, that you and your guests are doing. So anything I can do to help get that word out there, it's my pleasure to do.
Thank you for joining me today. And remember, you cannot achieve everything, but you do have the God-given ability to achieve anything. So stay focused, out of fear, and keep on keeping on. Until next time, be well and peaceful. For more information on today's episode and guest, or for resources that will assist you in overcoming your fears, visit livingbeyondyourfears.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, where 3 times a week we move to a life beyond our fears.